How many wish you hadn't have had to go through the last year? But if you could have chosen, you would have chosen something else.
Yeah.
It wasn't all that bad for me, actually. I was
All right,
more
that's
connected
good.
to that. So it's been a blessing for me almost. I hate to say that to, put people.
Yeah.
But
No,
due to
that's-
Zoom, I've actually been more connected than ever.
Hi, Judith, how are you? Hello?
Oh, there she is. Judith, are you
Judith
there?
is here. Yes, I'm sorry I'm late.
No, you're
Oh, that's-
perfect. You're perfectly on time. We're just starting. You know, Judy, but what you're talking about is what we all want to do. How do we turn this time, this most unusual time, into a blessing rather than a curse? Into something that helps us rather than something that just got in the way of what we wish would have happened? Because we all have that opportunity. And the hard part is that something like COVID is definitely beyond our control. And so we really want to reject it. But the image that she's using for the book, Dusk, Night, Dawn, is an image that tells us that there are other things that are beyond our control. It doesn't mean that they're bad, right? Dusk comes, night happens. How do we get beyond what seems to be the difficult and towards that new thing that it can draw out of us? That's the real question of all that. So she tells a couple of stories in there about how she needed time to be saved, right? If I can say it that way, where she was somehow lost, didn't know what was going on, how to escape from, and how somebody was there for you. So I want you to think about your life, about those places where you've been in a similar space, and it happens for all kinds of reasons. Where was it that you realized that you couldn't do it alone and that somebody else needed to step in to help you? Where was it that you were down some canyon, you couldn't find your way out, but then somehow something opened so that you found a new space, different space that you hadn't been in before? Essentially, where is it that you needed somebody to be there for you, and who was it? So I'll start because you kind of know my story. I've told it before about how, as I was going through my divorce and I was completely lost, I went into a space of extreme depression, right? Even suicidal spaces. And as I got back to my house, and it took me a long time to get back. It took me five minutes to get over to this little ridge, and I wanted to drive my car off the side of that ridge. It took me about 2 hours to get back home because I could only drive about, I don't know, 10 feet, and then I had to stop and cry, and then another 10 feet and stop and cry. When I got home, I called my friend Dana, and she listened to me. Just listen to me and let me just scream through the stuff that was going on. How about you? When was somebody there for you in the midst of life? When was night falling around you and you didn't know what to do?
The divorce was really hard for me too. But there were 3 of us who had known each other and who were all being faced with the same the same circumstances, or similar circumstances. And so we would get together and let the kids play, and we would cry or share or whatever. My greatest worry at that time was that my sadness and disorientation was going to affect the kids, because they were not old enough to really, I mean, they were pre-teens, but they weren't old enough to really talk about it.
Yeah.
And but then I got to the point where it got to be a little funny because both other women kept complaining because their husbands had left them for younger women. And I thought, my husband just left because he didn't want to be with me. He didn't leave for anybody else. I thought, I don't know which is harder. To left because somebody else looked better, or just to left because you look so bad.
I've learned though, Judy, that sometimes it helps to, in the midst of whatever you're dealing with, to realize that at least you're not dealing with something else.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not that that something else is better or worse. It's that you don't have to have it.
No.
Right. Because your stuff is enough.
I knew I was coming through it when I got to that realization of it's just different for everybody.
It is. It is. And that's
You know,
what makes those night moments of our lives, those dark and troubling moments, so difficult. It's because nobody knows exactly why it's so hard for you. And so you're kind of alone, right? Even when you have two good companions like you had, who had a lot of similarities to it, but wasn't exactly your journey, huh?
Nope.
How about the rest of you? Where have you gone through one of these times?
Well, there might be a lot of background noise here because the dogs are getting fed. So,
Because the owl's
keep that-
making noise.
huh?
Because the owl's making noise.
Yeah, the owl's making, it's the owl's fault. But for, mine was very similar, Judy, in that I went through the divorce, but it was my ex and my best friend of 26 years got together. And it was a double whammy.
Yeah.
And it was really hard on my 7-year-old son because he was losing we were a family unit almost, we were all so close. I just didn't anyway. But I was in my second year of graduate school then, and there were 3 of us who were going through it together, going through the master's program together, who all had children, and we were we were a little older than the other kids, and so we called ourselves the 3 Musketeers, and we helped each other write papers and do all this stuff, and they really came together for me, and as well as some other friends who just were there for me, and it was critical. It was like one friend lived out in the desert, and I would go out there and build big, huge bonfires because they were getting rid of a bunch of brush. That was really healing for Wade and I both. Wade and I both went through divorce recovery and some grief stuff and anger management and stuff like that, because he had to deal with a lot too. It was a really dark time, but all my friends told me I blossomed afterwards. But I know it was hard on Wade.
And Judy, oftentimes those kinds of times bring us to some of our higher levels, right? That we do blossom, but it does, when you're going through the middle of it, it doesn't feel like that's what's going to happen, does it?
No.
Yeah. Judith, how about yourself? Any difficult times for you?
Well, what came to mind as the most difficult time for me was after my husband died, and what also my sister, who said, well, you knew he was going to die, he was on hospice, like why is it being so hard on you? So that wasn't very helpful.
People are not always helpful in the midst of it, are they?
That was my next sister, and she
Yeah.
died a year later.
Wow.
They were both born in 25, so that was the irony of that. But and Susan Morgan came to mind as somebody who reached out a hand of hope and help at that point in time. Plus, the grief support groups that I went to, Jan Kind Woman, and had one at St. Francis, and then I went to the one at the hospice.
Good.
All those were all, they were groups, not just one person reaching out and helping.
Yeah, yeah. And I think all of you, maybe not all of you, but most of you were at the loss, grief, and transformation thing that Frank Williams is doing. And he's such a brilliant man that way, and has been speaking incredibly wise things. So if you get a chance, come tonight, because what we've gone through has so much sense of loss and grief, doesn't it? And so that's definitely helping.
Oh, the grief when COVID first started. I grieved over church. I grieved over concerts. I grieved over the library. So much at the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's all appropriate grief. It doesn't make it easy grief, does it?
Right.
Thank you. Doris, how about you?
The first thing that came to mind was my sister. I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and my sister Kate is the youngest, and she's 9 years younger than me. So I've always been big sister to her. And, you know, I left the house to go to college when she was just a young elementary kid. And then I moved away, and I didn't see a whole lot of her as a young adult. And so she always sort of stayed my baby sister in my mind. But when my dad died, I think it's 12 years ago now, I suddenly found myself leaning on her in a way that was a whole different relationship. She's a social worker, and she works in a hospital with people who are grieving. And so she's really good at that. And there was a lot to deal with after my dad died, cleaning out his house, selling it, sorting out all the stuff. And I felt so overwhelmed, but she was just there as a supportive person to me whenever I needed somebody to just talk to. And that was just really helpful to have that sort of switch in relationship, because we got to be sisters instead of big sister, little sister. Because, you know, before that, she's the one who called me for parenting advice and teenager advice and that sort of thing. And now I was able to lean on her.
Nice. You know, one of the best things about life is that you don't have to be the strong one all the time, no matter how much you tell yourself that. And at least part of what this book is about how we help each other. So let me just show you a little bit about what we're going to do. Let me share this with you. This is going to be our agenda for the book. It's pretty simple. We'll do basically a couple chapters each week. How many of you need me to send the book to you electronically?
No.
Does everyone have it, or anybody need it?
Mine's on loan, so I don't have it in hand, but
Okay.
that's okay. I'll get
Judy,
it.
would you rather I send those papers to you so you can read them that way, or what would you
No,
rather
that's
have?
okay. I'll get the book back soon.
Okay, all right. So you can just see, we're just going to do a couple of different chapters. So this first chapter, the prologue, is called Ribbons. And what that's about is about this story that she tells, where it's one of those days that everything goes wrong. Have you had those days?
Mm-hmm.
And so she's in the airport late with all kinds of people with a delayed plane. And there's this one family that's there, an Asian man and his family, and looks like a daughter or a granddaughter that's there with him. Well, it must be a daughter because he's a fairly young man. And the daughter is tying ribbons onto the man's arm, right? And so she ends the chapter this way, and I think that this is a good way for us to kind of set the stage of what we're going to do. So to answer my earlier question of where on earth we begin to recover our faith in life in the midst of so much bad news and dread, when our children's futures are so uncertain, we start in the here and now. That's why they call it the present. We start where our butts hurt and feet and minds We start where our butts and our feet and minds are. We start in these times of incomprehensible scientific predictions, madness and disbelief, aging and constantly nightmarish airport delays. And we look up and around for brighter ribbons.
Hmm.
So that's what we're trying to give to each other, is how do we find those brighter ribbons in the midst of whatever we're going through? Because here's the bad news, is that whatever this night has been, whatever this last year has been, it won't be the last night you go through, right? And there'll be other times when you will be in a challenging space. So how do we give ribbons to each other? Now, Judith, you talked really well about some of those ways and the grieving you went through. How many have missed seeing each other at church?
All of us.
I sit in that church building at least once a week talking to myself. And I miss all of you, just being there, responding to what I say, laughing, because I'm not sure I'm funny anymore because nobody laughs with me.
You are.
There's all those things that we have set in place that reinforce that, but in the midst of lost times, suddenly those are taken away, aren't they? And we have to say, what do we do now? How do we rediscover that? And at one point she asked, can the center hold? Can we stay together? Can we hold on to that which will keep us in a sane, safe, healthy place? And how many have had at least a few moments of doubt about whether you would be able to do that this year? Me too. Me too.
We still won't know until we actually try it on the 23rd.
Well, yeah, there's still a lot that needs to get us to where we'll feel relatively safe again. But the hard part is that it doesn't mean that everything's going to be perfect. I'm very aware this week of the loss that has happened. As soon as we get done here, I'm running over to Evergreen Cemetery, and with Janet and with Winifred, we're interring Scott's ashes, Janet's husband. Right now, he died before COVID started.
Yes.
And we probably would have done this long ago if COVID hadn't have been there. But I've been very aware of how Janet is absolutely going through this time of loneliness for all of us, but especially for her, who doesn't have that companion that she thought she would have as she walked through a time like this.
Mm.
And I think of people like Robbie Dick and Marge Hefty, who were so solidly there always for us, that suddenly when we come back together, won't be in those places where we're used to them being. But there's other things we've lost, maybe not in a bad way, but what do you think may not come back the same because of all this?
I don't know where I've seen it, but I resonated to it that I don't know how to relate to people in person anymore. All I know is my telephone.
Yeah.
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 I also
absolutely.
wanted to ask about this book. Was the lady from Texas with the pink Cadillac, was that a dream?
No, I think it's a true story. She just tells it in a dreamlike way, doesn't she? Which
Well,
I think
I
is,
got mixed up.
no, I think
If it was
she's
when
trying
she was
to,
spring up, or if it was when she was stuck in the hotel, like her husband, she called her husband and the flight delayed and he didn't pick up. And the Asian, she talked about them so close together. I just
yeah.
thought,
I think it's two different stories that she conflates. As she's
Oh.
sitting there in the airport and going through all of this day's stuff, she goes back to that other time with
Okay, thank you.
the pink lady car. The pink car lady.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, just looking at it, she says, once newly sober 33 years earlier at an airport hotel in Miami. And that's when she tells about
Yeah.
the lady. But she thinks of her again that night in San Diego.
Yeah.
What would the pink lady have told me to do?
Well,
Uh-huh.
and
Nothing.
yeah, and part of the reason why is because that pink lady was a ribbon for her. Right?
Oh.
It continues to be a ribbon, something that
Oh.
tells her that there's a different story than just what she's going through at the moment. Right? And in the midst of everything, we need those kinds of ribbons, don't we?
I think for me, when we get back together in person, like I live with Joyce now, so I have transportation to get to church
Mhm.
for the first time in a long time. So I might be able to get in person, and I probably will still wear a mask because my health issues are such that even if I get a cold, it almost immediately, my lungs are very, very fragile, and I get extremely ill. So I think it's gonna be like how to get used to like being around people in person again. But I love it because this past year and a half, I've gotten really close thanks to Zoom to some people from church
Mhm.
who it's like the people in Soul Connection and stuff. It's like I feel like we would never have talked that deeply in
Right.
person at church. I mean,
Right.
you see a lot of people and stuff, but you don't have these really. And Judith, it's like I know Judith better than I have since. I mean, we always said hi in church, but that was
Yes,
pretty much
yes. Oh,
and surfacey stuff. But it's like now I've had deep, deep conversations with these people, and that feels. It's like I feel like now when I come back in person, I'm going to have some really strong emotional attachments to people. And I'm grateful for that. And I don't want to lose it. And it's like, so in some ways, this has been such a blessing to me as far as being connected to the church. This is the first time I think I felt like a part of St. Francis. I've always felt like I'm the outlier. I'm the person that's like newbie, the person who doesn't fit anywhere really, and just kind of people say hi to, but it's like that's it. And I couldn't really join groups or anything because I didn't have transportation. So it's like, for me, this is kind of opening up a whole new vista for me as far as being part of church.
And Judy, thank you for sharing that, because we have to remember that the journey is not just our own and whatever we went through. And you do tell us that speaking of Siri, here she comes. Folks like you and Siri have been able to step into church, into St. Francis, different than what you've been able to before. And that's a good thing, isn't it?
It's been very, very helpful. It's helped center me this past year and help keep me grounded.
Yeah.
And help let me feel like I'm actually a part. When somebody says, "Oh, hi," I'm really glad to see you. It's like, I'm just like, I don't know. Now I feel like they really do see me.
Right. That they've had some time to be able to see deeper into your soul and vice versa. I want to give you a really cool image that has always helped me a lot. First year I was at First Church Phoenix, beginning of being a pastor. And First Church Phoenix is a big, big, long church. It's like, I don't know, it feels like half a mile from the front of the church to the back. It's one of those kinds of churches. And about 2/3 of the way.
Church?
What?
Is that First Church UCC or?
No, that's First Church Phoenix. Sorry, I didn't say that. First Church Phoenix, which is a Methodist church.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure.
Yeah. And about 2/3 of the way up on the right side was a lady named LaRue, who sat right there every single Sunday. And before I'd gotten there, I knew that she'd been going through one of those dark nights of the soul. Her husband had passed away in January, but on this particular Sunday, she was not in the dark night of the soul. She was practically giddy. She was bouncing in her chair. And I just go, LaRue, something is different about you. What's going on? She said, I pumped my own gas. Because that was something that her husband had always done. And suddenly she learned that she had that ability too. And not that she didn't know it beforehand, but or not that she didn't think that she could do it, but she never had. And so suddenly that dark night had opened up a door for her. And that's kind of what we're trying to figure out, are how do we discover ourselves differently because of these kinds of times? How do we allow that to be a wonder for us, right? Because in the dark nights we forget, don't we? In those times that are difficult, it's easy to not know what the truth is. That's why that type of image of dark night of the soul has continually been spoken about. But those dark nights don't just happen periodically. They might happen on a regular basis. In the midst of this chapter, she talks about the pastor and how he speaks up there every single week, and then she says, and then by Tuesday, the congregation forgets it, right? And that's often true, because life has other messages, other motivations, other things that are important, and we forget. So what are the things like church that help you to remember? What helps you get through the challenging things and reminds you of the best? It can be something, Judy, like an owl that flies into your tree, right? Those little glimpses of, oh, there's something more than just.
My grandkids, my son and my daughter-in-law. My daughter-in-law and I have a fierce, close relationship. And that just sustains me in a way that's just unbelievable. It just,
Yeah.
it brings me joy, it brings me happiness, it centers me. It's just, I'm just grateful that they're all doing so well.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially, I found that as I feel the aches in my body a little more, it's nice to see that our young godchild, we don't have any grandchildren, but our godchild, she does these backflips and whatnot. And I go, it's so nice that there's somebody who's not dealing with some of the difficulties of life that I have to deal with. It's very good to have you here.
Thank you.
Tell me what you're thinking.
Well, I was just thinking about, I just walked out a little while ago into the backyard to carry my young desert tortoise into the area near the 3 peach trees so he can go eat some food. And which he usually doesn't do. He usually just walks over past the food and goes back to sleep this time of year. But anyhow, when I went out there, there was a nest of quail that I'd known about in the top of one of my plant pots. There's no plants actually in it, so I'm not watering it. And there's a board that I just happened to have left there. You know, just I was going one place to another, left the board there and meant to take it somewhere else and didn't. So anyway, when I one day went to pick it up, I discovered a mother bird who was very upset with me and flew off, and a nest of eggs. So of course, and she came back and everything was fine. But now the eggs have hatched and the little baby quail are there, and they've gotten past the cotton ball stage. They're more to the stage where they have the black stripe on the top of their head, but they don't have, they're really not very big. They're pretty small and they don't have that top knot yet. But anyway, yesterday, somebody was over on the back porch helping me with something, and she noticed that that the parents were outside the pot in the yard calling the babies, and the babies were jumping and jumping, but the space was too big and they couldn't jump all the way up. When I went into the yard, they had been able to jump all the way up, and they were out on the ground, and mama and dad were there, and you know, and helping them to try to get through all the maze of things so that they could take them off wherever they're going. But anyway, it was just so cute and really sweet. And one of those moments where I didn't even know what I was walking into. And then suddenly I go, oh, wait a minute, there's something going on back here.
Nice, nice. And at least something, one of the things that these kinds of times invite us to do, at least, is to look at things like that differently, Siri.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes because it slows us down. Because I don't know about you, that sometimes we're so busy running around that we walk right past some of the miracles.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know if you ever remember that soda Coast had.
How about the rest of you? What's opening up for you because of this? Or let me say it a different way. Life, religion, hope of America, all of those things give us promises. And this year, those promises have been shattered in a lot of ways, haven't they? Right? One of the statistics that's been most troubling to me is that COVID has literally decreased our expected lifespan in America by a full year.
Yes.
By a full year, this one disease. And so it's like, wait a second, I thought the promise was. And so what we have to do in the midst of all this stuff is remember. And I mean that in two different ways. Get it back into our head, but we also have to put the members back onto the promise. And sometimes they go on differently. We have to redesign that promise in a way that now speaks to what it's been like post all of this, so that we understand it. We can't understand life quite the same as what we did before this day, could we? Because all of this has given us a different world than before. But how are you today seeing and hearing those promises of life in ways that you didn't beforehand?
I think for me, it's a new appreciation of small things. Like a couple months ago, I decided to plant a little garden. I haven't done a garden in a long time, but I planted some cherry tomato plants, and now they have great big green tomatoes on them. And every day there's 2 or 3 that turn red, and I pick them right off the plant and eat them. And they're just so delicious. And it's just like, wow, that's just really nice to have that. Yeah. And at the beginning of the pandemic, Scott and I started going out onto our patio and doing a little happy hour kind of thing, just sitting and spending time talking to each other, because we didn't have so many things pulling us in different directions. And it's just been nice to continue that most afternoons, just take a half an hour before dinner and spend time with each other and talk about how things are going. You know, not that we didn't do that before, but just to have a little break in the day when you're not getting out and going anywhere else. At least we're going out to our patio, you know.
Yeah.
So
one of the couples at 7:45 a couple weeks ago said they had to make a decision very early on that they were just going to hug each other very intentionally and longer than what they typically did, because they realized that they weren't going to get that physical touch any other way during all this time. And so they made a very deliberate choice to be able to do that. And it's not that they weren't a good loving couple beforehand. It's that this put them into a different space. Anyone else? This book is going to be about how do we do all of this work? How do we move ourselves? Not just, I want to make sure that what she's not saying is that the night is not necessarily just bad. Okay, it's not just the enemy. Sometimes we draw those kinds of parallels because in relative ways, night feels more difficult. But we don't want to just label it as bad. We want to say, what is it that it draws out of us? What is it that we become because of this time together? Right? What does it build in us? What does it grow in us? What is it that we can, how does it change our course to draw us to another space? She does, however, say that there's something that helps going through all this. And she says it this way: I continue to believe that love is sovereign here, and the hardest work we do is self-love and forgiveness. Now, I don't know if she meant self-love pointing towards here and forgiveness pointing that way, but I think you have to do self-love and self-forgiveness, both, right? And we have to point both those things the other way, because in the midst of the election season, how many found plenty of reasons to not have love pointing at some people, right? And how do we rekindle some of that love? So I've told you about my cousin Bob. His older sister is named Deanna, and Deanna was and remains my favorite cousin. But Deanna has some of those same conservative things as her little brother. So she wrote to me a month ago now and said, I'm going through all these things. I just wanted to tell you, Jim, what you meant to me. And she wrote some different things about that. And I wrote back to her and I said, I want you to know that you have always been and you always will be. Right? And so do we remember that love, or to remember some of those things that are also true? Do we remember the separators more than the connectors? So in the midst of all this time, especially those of you that have had to live with someone else through all of this, how many realize that they stepped on your toes a bunch and you had to figure out the annoyances of? That's not all they are, is it? No matter how much it feels like in the midst of it. Judy, you look like you're going to say something.
Well, I've been aware for a long time that it's not either or, but both and. So living with a family has its advantages. I mean, there was always somebody here in case something went wrong. There was always somebody here, to help if I needed it. But that annoyance factor was also really clear. The other thing is I get to thinking about the people who have been surviving COVID, along with blizzards and tornadoes and flooding, and how you manage your life when things just pile up like that. I mean, we complain about the heat and it keeps us inside, but it's also a possibility that it is a reminder for us to stay calmer. And I was also thinking that the whole notion of dust in the desert is kind of a relief. It's like, oh, good, the sun's going down.
Yeah.
Because it gets so hot. The dusk is is a longed for space because it does tend to cool down. It doesn't get cold, but it cools down.
Yeah.
And gives some breathing space from the intense heat. And so the dust part was okay, but the word I was struggling with when we first got on was what defining as COVID fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I managed, and I'm still managing fine, but I'm getting tired of reading, and I'm never tired of reading really, but I haven't found. I've got 6 books going. It's ridiculous because none of them are really lifting my spirits, and that's what I'm looking for. Other than Emma's book did, but you know, so I've been doing other little projects, but I'm not finishing anything. Nothing's quite filling it for me. So I'm really anxious to get back on some sort of schedule. I've missed that. And the other thing was that people who had work to do and had to go out and be someplace and do something may have felt jealous of me for not being required to do that.
Yeah.
But I really longed for a schedule and something to have to do, because this business of there's nothing that has to happen today is just driving me crazy.
Yeah.
Crazier.
Well, and for that, you know, the idea of darkness, it helps a lot, because darkness does hide the signposts. We don't see them at, you know, the typical signposts. We don't see them as readily. And you're right that all of this has taken away some of those ways that we mark life. And we rightfully feel kind of robbed out of that stuff, right? And we'll discover some of those. We'll also find some new ones, some marvelous new ones. We just have to figure out how to fit all that together, remember all that. And sometimes it's going to feel like an arm being stuck where a leg belongs, or vice versa, right? Where it fits differently than what it fit before. But we'll get there. One of the things I love about Anne Lamott, she is very honest, first of all, and she will tell you about the most difficult stuff in very, very denigrating ways of herself. But she'll also tell you in the midst of that how she discovered grace, glory, love in those challenging spaces and within that challenging self that she is. And so that's what we're going to try to help each other to discover is all of that within us. And we're going to try to do it with as much joy and hope as possible. At one point, she said these words, and I just thought they were wonderful, where she finished a paragraph and then started the new one with the last 4 words. She said, "The world seemed to have reached the point of no return, so we danced." So in the midst of all of this time, how do we dance? How do we teach each other to dance? Because some of the best dances I had were in the middle of the night, weren't they? In fact, sometimes it's not as fun to dance when the light's around, right? So how do we help each other to get to those spaces of joy and hope and love, right? We're going to find some obstacles, some difficulties. Sometimes we're going to be obstacles and difficulties towards doing that. But I hope that in the midst of this class, what will also be is the ones that remind each other. I want to go back to the image that I told you about before. The Asian man who'd had a stroke and was dealing with the paralysis that event had given to him. Daughter comes up and ties a ribbon on to say, "There's still joy, Dad." Do we remind each other of that? Because you can't sometimes do anything about the paralysis, whatever it is that struck yourself or the other person. But you can say in the midst of it, what is there? And right now, we've got to build into something much better than what we had before. We have to discover what is the newness that we can go towards, right? So tell me, as we get closer to the end here, what is it that you hope for in the midst of all this? What's something that you either see beginning to happen, or that you hope will happen because of all this?
I guess I'm thinking, I hope we maintain the notion of how connected we are.
Yeah.
Like the virus spreading all over the globe was a negative way of showing how connected people are with each other, but to remember the positive part of us being connected with one another.
And isn't that amazing that the virus hit in the midst of where our politics were saying America only, America first? The virus kind of said, yeah, I think we're a bigger world than that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm hoping for is that America will remember our generous spirit and provide what's needed for those countries that can't develop their own vaccine and so on, that we don't hold back on sharing what we have.
Yeah, like sharing the oxygen with India right now.
Yeah. See, I'm very aware of that, Judy, because one of my best friends is Victor, in not just in Peru, but in the outback of Peru, where he gets forgotten even by the Peruvian government, and they need vaccines more than maybe what we do. And I heard a list of statistics which said, while so-and-so, such and such a place has 60% or 70% vaccinated, and then somebody not very far away had 3%.
Ooh.
Right? And those 3% figures, very low figures, are not untypical in the backwaters of both this country and around the world. And you're right, do we share? Do we care enough to know that they need to have that immunity as much as we do?
America first isn't going to work if everybody
Right?
else has got the disease. It's just
Right.
not gonna.
Right?
My hope is that we're able to that there's going to be a group or a force of nature in this country of people who are awake to so much of the injustice in our system, and how the whole thing our country's built on is that we think we're like so superior. Stuff is a lie. So much of our history that we're taught is a lie, and that we come to get that the people who are filled with love and caring and want to take this world into a different place will be able to stand up to those Trump and hardcore Republicans who are just solidifying around him to stop voting rights, to stop. I mean, it's like we're really on a scale right now of whether are we going to go authoritarian, or what kind of government are we going to come to? And I think I've heard so many legislators who are so brilliant about what needs to be done. And it's so simple for our infrastructure, for the migrants. There's so many good, solid ideas out there. That how can we elect more people that are going to help us achieve that? How can we stop this Trump Republican mess that's building into this. And they're minority, but they're very organized. And so how do we come together as a caring nation and stop that?
Well,
That's-
and part of that comes down to, do we tell the stories, the positive stories, the good stories, the wonder of what can happen, or do we tell the fear-invoking stories? Because night invokes fear, doesn't it?
But you have to be aware of both.
Well, and I'm not trying to say that you,
Into the positive, but I think I'm also aware of I mean, it's very easy to slip into
absolutely.
the dark.
Right. Yep. And it's not just that. It's also, what can this bring out of us? The story I told right at the beginning of my friend Dana, if I can summarize it in a couple words, it meant her being there meant that life had not ended for me, that there was a light beyond just what I was going through at that moment. There was hope. And when we give into our fears, we don't see that light any longer, that possibility. What other hopes do you have?
I have hopes for our young people. I think that this past year, in the whole Black Lives Matter thing, we've seen a lot of mobilization of young people. I just talked to my grandson on the phone for a while last night. He's 23 and lives in Michigan. He's his first year with a job out of college. And he was telling me how he has a lot of hope for the future. And he says, I think we're coming to the time when we have universal health care and we have universal child care. And this is a guy who doesn't even have a steady girlfriend, much less thinking of a family. And he's already seeing that universal child care is something really important. And so, I'm really proud of him. And I think that he's not the only one that age that's thinking of how to make our country a better place.
Yeah. Thank you. I as well have hope in what those next generations, how they view life differently than our generations do. That's a good thing. So she starts off the whole book with a poem. And so I'd like to end today with that same poem. It's a poem by Ursula K. Le Guin. And it's called Hymn to Time. And it says this: Time says, let there be, every moment. And instantly there is space and the radiance of each bright galaxy, and eyes beholding radiance, and the gnats flickering dance in the sea's expanse, and death and chance. Time makes room for going and coming home, and in time's womb begins all ending. Time is being, and being time. It is all one thing, the shining, the seen, the dark abounding. As we go through the next few weeks, I look forward to walking the journey of darkness and hope, of joy and not quite perfect moments, as we try to help each other to see and find the right way to remember ourselves. Thank you for your time.
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Anybody, again, I'm going to ask the question. Anybody need me to send the readings to you?
I've got the book on my Kindle.
Yeah. Could you send the agenda of the
I can.
chapters each week? That would be great.